Today on The Big Debate, playing it too safe. Are we harming pupils by not letting them take risks? Hello and welcome to the programme. Have schools got the balance right when it comes to risk? All teachers know the importance of health and safety when planning trips and activities, but is our obsession with keeping pupils safe actually harming them by not allowing them to take risks in a controlled environment? Or is the number of deaths on school trips already too high? In just the last 12 years, 31 children have been killed. Joining me to discuss this are the founder of Yo Sushi and Yotel and former Dragon's Den star Simon Woodruff, the chair of the Health and Safety Executive, Judith Hackett, the General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers, Mick Brooks, and the Sun columnist and broadcaster, John Gaunt. We've also assembled an audience of experts, teachers, parents and pupils to take part in today's Big Debate. Let's start with a few quick thoughts from our eminent panel. Simon Woodruff, have we got the balance right?
You wouldn't expect me to say anything else. But I do think that in 100 years from now, people will look back and say, in this age of political correctness and health and safety, that somehow we had the whole thing completely wrong, and it's actually our fear as adults and not the children's, and we're actually holding them back for something. And it seems to me that of all the professions, teachers are probably one of the most motivated for very sincere reasons, and we need to give them the freedom to go out and do what's right for children. Even, and I say this with thought, even when we know that children will die along that way, because that is the denial that is the reality of where we are.
Well, that's the nub, and we'll be coming to that. But overall, in terms of balance, Judith Hackett, are we right or wrong?
I think on balance, we're not doing enough to let young people experience risk. We worry about that very much, and I suppose that may come as a surprise to some people in the audience, because coming from the Health and Safety Executive, you might think we're the proponents of it, but we're not. If for no other reason than these young people will one day enter the world of work. And if they come into the world of work completely risk naive, with no experience of how to deal with risk, we can be absolutely sure they're going to get seriously hurt in the workplace if they come in with that attitude. So they've got to learn about risk while they're at school, and it's got to be part of the life skills that form an important part of their education.
Mick Brooks.
Well, I've spent more than 3 decades working in schools and taking children on school trips, and I think probably I'd ask the audience about your memories of what you experienced in school, and I'm sure some of those things will stand out for you. I've always done that, but I'm aware, very much aware, that the sense of risk that you take in continuing those activities has increased over the years, and I think there's several reasons for that. But the reason for taking children and young people out on trips, I think, is even more important now, because many children and young people are immersed in a cyber world, and I think actually what they need to do is experience the real world, and wilderness adventure and adventure activities, I think, are so important.
John Gaunt.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important that kids kept safe and also go out and experience things. But it's a bit like competitive sport, isn't it? You've got to learn to fail to learn what success is. And sometimes we do mollycoddle our kids. But clearly, I mean, I'm a father of 2 daughters. I want them to be safe, but I do want them to scrape their knees. I do want them to climb trees. I do want them to fall over. I do want them to be hurt sometimes, because they've got to learn that is the real world. And it has gone too far the other way. I mean, I wrote about it in The Sun a few weeks ago. A friend of mine, his daughter was going to Brighton for the day to experience a traditional British holiday was meant to be the idea, but they had to sign a form saying that she was allowed to eat a bag of chips and she was allowed to paddle in the sea. Well, that's gone too far. That's just absolute garbage, and that's the kind of rubbish we've got to get rid of. But one of the problems, of course, is the ambulance-chasing compensation lawyers that make you as teachers petrified to take kids out of school. But kids have got to experience it, just like in sport. I was too fat to be any good at cross-country, probably like yourself, but I was good at rugby. But I was good at rugby, you know? So I was good at one thing, rubbish at something else. But, you know, I went to my daughter's junior school and everyone got a rosette. Everyone was a winner. What an absolute load of cobblers. Because in life, that ain't going to be the way it is.
All
You're
right,
going to fail at
a lot of things to pick up there, and apparently a curious agreement between all our panellists. But as we drill into this, let's see if that holds up. And as we've heard, on average, 2 or 3 pupils are killed on school trips every year. In 1999, 13-year-old Gemma Carter from Beeston in Leeds drowned while on a trip to northern France. She'd been allowed to paddle in the sea despite her mother having written to the school to warn them that Gemma couldn't swim.
My daughter Gemma went on a school trip in June 10 years ago, and she went to northern France, Le Touquet, and there was only 2 days into the trip when unfortunately she drowned. The problem was they were all having the dinner, and of course, as children do, they were getting a little bit restless, and some of the kids wanted to go down to the beach, some of the children wanted to stay at the hotel. So the children were allowed to go to the beach unsupervised, and some of the children decided to go into the sea. And my daughter was one of those. The teachers did call them back to, you know, to get them out of the water, but Gemma was having major problems because the current had taken her a little bit further out. A friend did raise the alarm and said that Gemma was having trouble in the water. They hadn't realised how many children had gone from the hotel to the beach because there was no head count done, so time was wasted and they had to get back to the hotel, and that's when they realised that a member of the party was missing. When we had the inquest, there was a lot of things that should have been done that weren't done, you know. It was just like basic common sense. You know, obviously I was really very angry at the time, and I suppose to a point I still am now. But yeah, there were things that should have been done that weren't done on that night.
Well, Simon Woodruff, you quite confidently said in your opening statement, we've got to accept that there will be more death if you're going to have more risk. But that's the real impact of more death, and you're saying we've just got to accept that.
Well, I think it's something that we just in society we live with. There's a denial. You know, I mean, it's the same with starvation in Africa. There's millions of kids dying as we eat expensive meals. Now, I'm honest enough to say to myself that I'm willing to, you know, that is the way it is, that I have a denial about that. And I think it's the same with, it's the unpalatable truth, because if somebody said it was my daughter, I'd change the whole laws. But we have to do something that is for the greater good. And the world is very imperfect and messy, and that is the truth.
Judith?
Well, I think this is one area where I have a very different view. What struck me most was that girl's mother saying there were some basic common sense things that could have been done that weren't. And that's what makes things like that such a tragedy. I agree with Simon that you can't always stop accidents and tragedies happening. But I think there are some that happen that could be prevented.
But you say children need to be exposed to more risk as well, and the inevitable consequence of that is more children dying. You accept that?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I think if they are exposed to risk and taught how to behave around risk, they will learn how to deal with it and become safer because of it, actually.
But let me just take a quick show of hands in the audience here, because we are talking about what we're prepared to accept as a consequence. Because there seems to be this remarkable consensus that everyone thinks children should be exposed to more risk. Are you prepared to accept more accidents as a consequence of exposing children to greater risks? If you think that's a trade-off worth having, raise your hand. And if you think it's not worth having?
It's a false dichotomy.
Why is it a false dichotomy?
It's a false dichotomy because for every accident that is the result of poorly managed risk, which that was not an argument for not exposing children to risk. It was an argument for managing risk properly, which hadn't happened there. For every child who is injured or dies, tragically, as a result of poorly managed risk, how many are saved because they've learned to confront risk, confront danger, and assess it properly in adult life?
Randall Williams, what's your approach here? I mean, in terms of what we have to say we are prepared to accept if we want children to be exposed to more?
What we haven't talked about yet are the benefits, and we must try to balance the risks and the benefits. There are huge benefits to kids in experiencing, for example, adventurous activities. They come back with a vastly increased self-confidence, and that carries back to the classroom. And those benefits far outweigh the small risks involved.
Okay, let me bring in Lisa Lilly, former primary school teacher. I mean, what is at stake here in terms of what is the consequence on children from the way that they are currently being treated in school?
Well, I do fear that there is a risk that if these children aren't exposed to something new and different, that they won't be able to face their fears and won't have the confidence to go into new situations.
But is there, I mean, why do you say that? Is there any evidence for that children are leaving school unable to cope with the outside world?
Well, we've talked about the health and safety when they enter the workplace. If they haven't been taught those skills of how to look out for risks, how are they able to follow those through into their future?
Simon Woodruff, I mean, do you think people are entering the workforce leaving school without really any sense of risk assessment?
I think we have an absolutely mad culture in the world. I mean, in business, we celebrate people taking risks. We have an entrepreneurial society that we're there. We've got the Dragon's Den. We're encouraging people to go out and do that. And yet we're saying, be careful, be careful, be careful. You know, that sort of mother's perfect thing that they always said. No, I think we have to do more.
Well, Judith, you're agreeing with a lot of this, but your health and safety industry is getting a bad kicking here.
Well, and I think you're right to say it's the health and safety industry, because I think John's already identified some of the elements to it. The reason I think people are becoming more and more risk averse is because of fear of litigation, fear of blame, and long drawn out debates and so on. That's what gets in the way of people doing what makes sense. It certainly isn't regulation, and I will defend what we do and what we put in place in terms of regulation, because so much of it is called regulation when it isn't.
But if it's not regulation, how can somebody sue against it? I mean, it's got to be, as otherwise you're going to go in front of the judge and you say, boom, boom, boom. It's the laws that mean that you can do that.
It's got to be people who are supplying the hazard jackets. And when I went to a wedding recently, you know, there was a yellow sign, which has got to be associated with people like yourself. You know, careful, towel rail, hot. Well, no, you know what, Sherlock. And then you go to the tap. There's a sign next to the tap. Careful, hot water. This is what's gone wrong in society, and it is the health and safety executive who are behind these initiatives. And then you say it's the industry that causes the problem. Well, it's you who promote that industry by saying we've got to have a label on anything that might be too hot.
Let's be very clear where the health and safety executive's remit fits and why we have an involvement in this whole area. Our remit is about protecting people at work, and protecting people who are in the workplace or people who are affected by work activities. That's it. That's the extent of the health and safety executive's involvement. All of these other blame culture issues that get associated with us are actually nothing to do with our regulation, and it's all about civil liability and civil litigation.
Where do the stickers come
I think what I've heard Judith say is eminently sensible, but what happens is that what you're saying very sensibly from where you're sitting then gets translated by the nitpickers who produce all of this stuff and wrap people up. And why they're doing this? Because they're actually, what they're doing in producing rafts of legislation is protecting themselves, and they're passing the blame on to the people who then take the children away. And I think that's where the problem lies.
Let me just introduce some research here, because Teachers TV has commissioned an exclusive poll of teachers' attitudes to health and safety regulations and the impact they have on education. The poll asked more than 500 teachers whether health and safety rules in school were too restrictive. The respondents were split down the middle. 45.7% said they were, 45.7% said they weren't. When asked whether health and safety regulations had a negative impact on pupils' education, in total more than 44% agreed they do, around 33% said they disagreed. When it came to their pupils' personal development, more than 46% said they agreed that there was an adverse impact, and around 46% also thought that health and safety regulations had a negative impact on the education workforce. When asked about school trips, there was again a split. In response to the question, have health and safety regulations negatively restricted school trips, just under 42% said they had, and just short of 40% said they hadn't. Rob Tanner, you're a science teacher.
Yes.
Are you able to do all the same experiments that I saw as a kid? You can drop sodium in a bowl of water and do all of that kind of thing?
Yes, I'm able to do that still, but I think we have to be quite careful about what we allow the children to do. And without strong leadership from senior management, it would be too easy for teachers to be frightened into allowing the children to do less. And so I think it's a sign of a good school where the teachers are encouraged to allow children to take managed risk and be able to use Bunsen burners, be allowed to drop glassware. They're mortified, of course.
But do you have any reason to think that's not happening?
But I think, no, I think there is my worry is that people are too frightened to do that for fear of litigation.
Okay, Anita Kapila,
yeah.
What's your experience?
I'd choose the type of trip that I'd go on. I'd make sure that there was, you know, we weren't going to too many places, crossing too many roads. You know, I went to Oxford the other week, and I couldn't take them to town. I didn't put it on my risk assessment. It would take me more hours to write down that I was going to Oxford Town Centre, but I did it anyway, so I'm probably going to get into trouble. I didn't put it on my risk assessment. I took them to Oxford anyway. They said, oh, let's go and take a risk. We did it. But yeah, it does affect what kind of trip you go out on. And I was on my own with these kids with a few LSAs. It was scary.
John Gordon, do you think there should be any of these rules, really?
Well, of course,
or is it just a matter of common sense?
It's about common sense, isn't it? Fundamentally, it's about common sense. It's about this woman here who decided to take her kids out. I mean, it's like the old days with the national curriculum, isn't it? Wasn't the best days at school was when your teacher said, oh, it's too hot today, let's go down the river, or let's go and do this. Weren't they the best days? Well, the teachers nowadays, when there's national curriculum, and my wife was a...
Let's not get into curriculum. Let's keep it to health and safety.
This is very important. It's about the same thing. It's about trusting your teachers. I send my kids to a school where I do trust the teachers. I look at some of them, I think, I don't trust you in particular. But there are others where you know those teachers are going to look after your kids. And I want the maverick teacher, the teacher who says, come on, let's go and do this. Because that's what education's about. Education isn't just about getting 10 A stars.
But would you do away with the regulations? Do away with the HSE?
No. I think the lady's not taking any responsibility. I mean, it's obviously the regulation leads to the stickers, leads to the high-vis jackets, leads to the 18 pages of risk assessment, etc., etc. And she must have the worst PR team in the world. If she's now saying none of this is to do with her, she needs to get the message over to the industry to say, stop getting us into this position where we have to have a sign in my hotel room this morning, careful, this towel rail may be hot. Careful, this cup of coffee. At Warwickshire Police, my brother's a copper. In Warwickshire Police, he went to the coffee machine after a weekend and got a cup of coffee, and it was only half a cup. So he went and complained, said, I've only got half a cup. Yeah, health and safety, new rules. Not allowed to have a full cup. He's a copper, for God's sake. He knows it might be hot. That's what's wrong, and that does come from you, love.
I'm sorry it doesn't. I'm sorry it doesn't, but there is a whole industry out there. I will be the first to admit there's a whole industry out there who make a lot of money out of creating myths around and use us as the people who invented these myths. Yeah. I can tell you my own stories. I've got daughters. My daughters went to school. They both did world challenges. One went to Mexico, one went to Tanzania. They took risks, and I was very happy for them.
But then is the real issue that teachers are ignorant about what the rules are and what the regulations are and what they should be doing?
I think teachers are badly advised, actually. And one of the things we have to change, and we're already trying to change in HSE, is to get better advice to teachers.
The risk assessment is a good
example. The risk assessment is a good example. It doesn't have to be 18 pages. If you look on our website, look at some example risk assessments, including ones for schools. They're pretty simple documents, and we say that's good enough. But there's a whole industry out there who make it much more complicated because they make money out of it.
I'd get rid of all the rules. We've had 10 years of education to teach us about all of this. We know it. We know it. It's rammed down our throat. We know it. Get rid of all the rules. Give the responsibility.
But apparently
back to the
you
people in
don't
the front.
know it. I mean, because there's so much confusion out there, apparently, about what is right and what's wrong. I mean, in this research...
because individuals can make those decisions for children.
But in this research that we commissioned, we also asked people, you know, examples of sort of, you know, where health and safety gets in the way. People, you know, one teacher cited having to tell pupils to wear goggles when dealing with blue tack. About having to write a risk assessment when using Pritt stick. Now, there are all sorts of absurd things going on in schools. Whose fault is it, Judah?
There's absolutely no reason at all why they should be wearing goggles to do the things you talk about. It's just ridiculous.
So something's gone massively wrong then, hasn't it? If
well,
that's happened.
I don't disagree that something has gone massively wrong. What I do disagree is that we're sitting back and letting it happen. We're putting a lot of effort into trying to bring this common sense back to the agenda.
Well, it sounds like your members' fault.
We've got a lot of ground to row back.
If head teachers are allowing this kind of nonsense to go on...
I tell Gordon Brown that he should have a new ministry called the Ministry of Common Sense. Yeah. And he said, you could see his brain whirring, and then he said, yeah. He said, the problem is, who would run it?
Yeah. Mick, I put something to you there.
I can see how this would come round to head teachers, yes.
Well, you are in charge. So
nominally, yes. But actually, and there has been some work going on. For instance, the Learning Outside the Classroom initiative, where all the providers, the places where children go, have their own risk assessments, and that actually lowers the amount of work to be done. It's about managing it. I'm really interested in that poll, because I think if you'd asked head teachers only those questions, you'd have had a far more negative response, because actually when it comes down to it, it's the head of the school that carries the can.
Let me bring in Sue Palmer now, because you've written a book called Toxic Childhood. We posed right at the beginning of this debate the whole question of whether we're actually harming children as a result of all this. Now, this has all been good fun, and we can point out all the ridiculous examples of things we all have to do. If there is no consequence, then it doesn't really matter. But is there a real risk of emotional harm?
I think there's an enormous risk that we're damaging an entire generation, because not just in school, but outdoors, out beyond school, the known consequences of not getting to play out and learn to take risks and to make decisions, develop social competence, getting along with the other kids, develop your physical fitness, coordination and control, develop above all resilience, which will hopefully mean that when you grow up, you're a bit more common senseful. Yes. All these things are, we're risking that for a few possible accidents, awful, yeah. But the payoff is just, it's ridiculous. But absolute nonsense.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you talk about that, but I mean, does the fear instilled in children in terms of, you know, don't go out, don't do this, don't fall over, does that even compare to the kinds of pressures we put our children under in school elsewhere? When you think about exam pressure, pressure to
if kids get to play
surely this pales into insignificance.
If kids get to play, they learn how to fail through play. You don't, I always talk to women about making petal perfume. You know, everybody remembers doing that when they were a kid. You don't make it just once, you make it loads of times, and you never make it smell nice. But it doesn't matter, because you're playing, and you learn to fail through that. Actually, when we put the pressures on them in school, that's not their pressures, that's grown-up pressures. And kids want to please the grown-ups, so that really hurts. But they can learn a lot about resilience, bouncing back from failure.
Can I bring in some of we've got some pupils, real life, you know, under 18s with us as well. Guy at the back in the purple, what do you think? Do you feel vulnerable and at risk?
No. I don't feel vulnerable and at risk, but like sometimes when you're going on school trips, etc., like you do feel that maybe the teachers are following a bit too much like to the guidelines, and you feel that sometimes you are held back. Like in younger years, you're held back, but as you grow through the school and through the education system, as I've got older, that school trips have got more like lenient with us. Yeah. And
there next to you in the purple.
I think more risks need to be taken, but within a controlled environment, because like we can go on trips, but I think we're too, it's like when we go on trips, we're not exactly going to be running through traffic or, you know, jumping in front of trains. Like we can handle ourselves at this age when we go, because recently I went to New York and there was only like 3 teachers and like 30 students. and we handled ourselves, like we was allowed to roam around Times Square, roam around everywhere without having a teacher hold our hand around everywhere. So if it's in a controlled environment and there's like a certain structure, then risks can be taken without accidents happening. I don't really agree with the fact that if you take more risks, then you have to accept more accidents. I think risks can be taken, but within a sort of, with a certain structure and trust in the teacher.
Okay, thanks very much. We're going to pause it there for a moment. After the break, on the big debate, we'll be asking, should health and safety be taken away from the hands of teachers? Or is it the compensation culture that's the real problem? Welcome back to the big debate. As we've been hearing today, teachers clearly feel under pressure when taking responsibility for the health and safety of pupils, whether in school or out on trips. So is the answer to delegate out to the specialists? We went along to one centre in Bristol which trains pupils to deal with danger.
Life Skills is an interactive safety education centre. We have about 10,000 children visitors every year, as well as adults with learning difficulties and older people's groups as well. And the whole point of it is that we have groups into safe, real situations so that they can learn to make their lives safer in the future.
Every year, about 30,000 children in our area need to go to hospital because they've injured themselves.
The whole point of Life Skills is to make their lives safer in whatever they're doing. We don't want to wrap them up in cotton wool. We don't want them not to go out or to have adult supervision at all times, so we want them to be going out, enjoying themselves, but just to be aware of the risks that are out there so that then, whatever they're confronted with, they can deal with it.
Obviously, coming to the Life Skills Centre, they learn about life skills, all the sorts of things that they could encounter, problems they could encounter at home, details dealing with drugs, alcohol, real life experiences, and they come here and they get to experience it in a real life manner. They actually see a potential accident, they then make the phone call and they actually have to deal with the emergency services. It actually equips them to be able to deal with that if it was posed to them at home.
Schools are really keen to visit us, and obviously with the follow-up work and stuff, and it's all there to obviously make the children safer in the future, which is good.
Mick Brooks, a good example of an outside agency training children themselves, but schools are turning to outside agencies more and more to actually run particular events and trips. Why is that happening?
Two reasons. I think, for instance, if I was taking a group of children up to, say, the Lake District, then I would want to go to a centre where there is an expert there for two reasons. Not only because they will have a deeper understanding of the dangers of, for instance, flash flooding and places that it's dangerous to go, but actually because they know the district, they know the area, and they are the experts. And it's absolutely wonderful when you take children out and you're in the hands of somebody who actually knows their skill. I think that's why it is, and I think that's absolutely right. And remember that if you're on a residential trip, the teachers will have the care of the children 24 hours a day. Let me tell you, a 5-day residential is exhausting. So having somebody there who can actually take the load off you, and you join in, and actually one of the great things, and I will speak up for teaching assistants, because I've always taken teaching assistants on my trips, that you learn things as well as a teacher, and that's why I think.
Gentleman in the jacket there, yes.
What confuses me there is that real world is outside the door. And that's the real world where there is risks, and that's where you'll need to engage. If you go up Snowdon, that's an exceptional event, and you might call in specialists. It should just be parents and their teachers and children engaging with the real world. And that really troubled me.
You were shaking your head, John Gaunt, at that.
That could only happen under New Labour, what you've just shown us on that film. I mean, what an absolute load of cobblers. I mean, I went to Dolly Mock in Wales when I was a kid, and it was fantastic because when you go do things like abseiling, if you've got the bully at the top or the bully on the rope and the weaker kids having to help him down, they learn about teamwork. That's a great thing. And Mick's right, you need a specialist. You do not need to go to a specialist centre to learn how to put the kettle on, not to climb up a pylon, and what to do if there's a fire. That's what Mum and Dad teach you. That's what you learn through life. That is New Labour, social engineering, garbage. and it needs to be scrapped. I don't want my taxes spent on that.
In the front row here, yes.
I think there's a place for both.
Really?
Absolutely. And in these centres like the one we saw in Bristol, which only a third of children go to during their school careers, it would be much better if everybody could go to. In 2 hours...
Well, so you think every child should go through something like that?
At least once. In 2 hours, you can take your children through a dozen or maybe 15 different scenarios or situations they might one day find themselves in. And if you look at the accident statistics, where you train and you educate and you excite and interest children is something about their own survival and about the survival of their friends, which they come away with a big glow about because they have really enjoyed their couple of hours in such a centre. Where you do that, you see a measurable difference in terms of home awareness. They teach their parents about home accidents. They influence their fathers about driving, and it has a very positive effect on society.
I don't know how I got to the age of 48 without people like you telling me how to wipe my backside. You're what's wrong with education.
You're a survivor. You're a survivor. What about the people who aren't here to tell your story?
For goodness sake, grow up. For goodness sake.
Well,
it's
I think
the
I'm old
nanny
enough
state
to come back at you.
No, I think
let's keep the tone.
I think there will be some good
Rubbish.
things like that that you can outsource. There will be. But what I don't like, and I see it in business every day, is the consultants. Yeah. And my suspicion is that a lot of the reason that you go to these consultants is because it's too scary. And it's not until we actually take off...
Or because they know the law. They know what the regulations
are. Yeah, but you know,
are.
it's not until we've got to take a massive amount off. And we've got to take the judges, have got to stop handing down judgments that everybody's scared of. The insurance companies have got to lighten up on that whole thing. And I've got to say that the media, sorry, you're responsible as well. Because actually the thing that you're really scared of is trial by media and trial by culture.
I think the media are very responsible, to be honest, when there's
because they tell stories as soon as there's a bloke killed, they tell stories about it.
Well,
he was killed and the teacher didn't do this. You know, the teachers...
Well, can you point to the story where that happens? I think we actually report the death of children on school trips in a very sensible and in a mature way. And we also point out that it is a rare thing. And also most tabloid newspapers, particularly The Sun, we do talk about the fact that we want our kids not to be wrapped in cotton wool.
I was going to say that centres like this show a display of fear within schools because it's unnecessary, and as a pupil I'd rather hear the risk from my teacher herself or himself rather than... Because then if I see like risks like that illustrated in front of me, when I go on a trip I'll be more aware of it, but it's gonna take away the fun.
You've provoked someone behind you. What would you like to say in this?
I was going to say, up until a few moments ago, we hadn't heard the word parents mentioned once. And surely the job of the parents is to instill some of this in their children before they even get to school.
Okay, yes, and the lady here in the free.
I am a journalist and I actually run a programme teaching kids how to manage risk in schools, which is backed by the Association of Chief Police Officers. And I think that we do need to teach children what risk is and how to manage it, and we should have a national standard of safety information in our schools. And I think that children, if they don't get exposed to understanding what different risks are, our programme started because we worked with Millie Dowler's mother, and Millie's mother felt that she hadn't talked to Millie about what the risks were, and because they lived in a nice place in Surrey, and so therefore she wasn't going to come across a risk on the way home. So I don't think we nanny our children or cosset them by helping them to understand what risk is and how they can manage it. But I do agree with you, because we brought some children down to Downing Street to have awards for our programme, and they couldn't come because their teachers were too afraid of how many roads they'd have to cross in London. You know,
Can I ask some of the teachers and the head teachers in the audience? I mean, do you understand why schools are turning to outside agencies? Yes, gentlemen in the grey.
Judas come in for a good deal of stick on behalf of the Health and Safety Executive, but it isn't just health and safety regulations that are driving schools into the arms of specialist agencies. I mean, the one regulatory organisation, the regulatory framework that trumps all others, and quite rightly, is child protection. But it is the case that in 6 months' time, it will not be possible to billet children coming over on a language exchange with families without registering those families with the ISA. Now that's going to kill off language exchanges. It will kill off touring rugby cricket sides, because how many families are going to want to go through that registration process? That's another area of opportunity for adventure killed off by regulation.
As a parent, I'd quite like to know that my children aren't going to live with a child abuser.
Sure, but is this not, of course, and to challenge that approach is tantamount, isn't it, or is perceived by journalists, it's an easy win, as tantamount to siding with a child abuser. It's a nonsense. We're talking about families that have children in the same school, who are going to be in the same household. This, to me, is overkill, and it's going to have a very damaging effect on the richness of education that's been on offer in our schools for decades.
All right. Now, as we said earlier, at least one of the drivers for this is the law and the way people are turning to the law and suing teachers and schools when things go wrong. I mean, Mick Brooks, how do you tackle the compensation culture? I mean, isn't it basically a symptom of the fact that the relationship between parents and schools has broken down? Parents don't see themselves as part of the school anymore.
No, I think that's a massive generalisation. And in my experience of say, more than 3 decades of working in schools, most parents actually care for their children. They've got good relationships with schools, and I think that is across the piece. There are some parents who think that, you know, something happens, somebody falls over, and this is lottery money, and suddenly they, you know, they get rich, and they actually cause a problem for all of us. And a lot of this legislation has been caused because of some parents who are actually ultimately entirely selfish, and they make life worse for everybody else because they bring in this raft of
We've got a solicitor in the audience, John Gaunt, don't boo and hiss, Sharon Libbard. What is the problem here, or what is the approach of parents, if you like, when it comes to suing schools?
One has to bear in mind that there are over 1 million school trips which takes place each year. I work for the Association of Teachers and Lecturers, and we certainly agree that they are valuable a learning experience for pupils, and we encourage our members, we support ATL members who do go on school trips. We're very much in favour of that. However, our members are very concerned about being sued if something goes wrong. If something does go wrong, their first thought is, you know, is for the pupil and their family. Second thought, am I going to be sued? So we have to spend a lot of time reassuring them that this is highly unlikely to happen. But sometimes it just doesn't appease the members when you have parents who are more litigious and therefore threatening our members with litigation. Often our members actually feel that they are made to feel blameworthy from the very beginning.
We have the same problems in industry. We have the problems with employment law. It's right through the culture. I think what has to happen is protest by the people. And actually, I think all of you have an enormous responsibility. I think that you guys need to stand up because deep in your hearts, you know, you can visualize what the world could be like. And actually, all this process stuff and laws, we put it all back to the government to make the laws. It's too complicated. You know what's right, and you need to stand up and protest and take risks yourself.
Okay. All right, let me, we're sort of coming to the end, and I want to get a few ideas from each of you on what you would actually do if, heaven forbid, you were in charge. John Gaunt.
No, I like that idea.
Yeah, it's a cheap jibe. He's been practicing that all day. The bottom line is I'd let kids be kids. I'd let them experience danger. I'd let them get involved and play competitive sport. I'd let them learn to fail as well as to win. I'd like them to learn that it's good to win. It's good to take part, but it's also good to win. Sometimes you lose, sometimes you fail. You can't be good at everything. You cannot be good at everything. And parents, encourage more parents to take more responsibility, but keep reminding ourselves, most kids in this country are great. Most parents are fantastic and they love their children and they bring them up the right way.
Mick Brooks, what would you actually do?
2 things. I think, first of all, I think those parents and others who take schools on and sue schools for no very good reason actually should feel the full force of the law. If you are defrauding your insurance company because you're saying something was wrong with your carpet and it isn't, that's fraud. And I think that there is a fraud here going on with parents. So I think there needs to be some way of getting back and making sure those parents are taken to task. The second thing I would do was to say, for goodness sake, just go for it. Get out there and do these things, whether it's in your local environment or whether it's somewhere far more adventurous, because that's where I think, and certainly in my experience, true education lies.
Judith Hackett.
I think it's about working with kids and with their parents, because I genuinely believe a lot of this problem is associated with overprotective parents. And my experience with my girls when they were at school was that when they went out on trips, the parents were involved in the decisions before they went on the trips. This is what's going to happen, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. We can't make any guarantees. And if you have that conversation before the fact, you don't get into these horrible messes where you get into litigation and so on, because you have a good understanding of the real exposure that they're going to find and what the benefits will be. That's what we need more of.
But the rules don't need to change, is what you're saying?
I think we need to be clear what the rules are, because there's a lot of myths out there that there are rules where there are none.
Okay. Simon Woodruff, you're in charge. What would you actually do?
I don't think there's much I can do. I think you said go for it, and I'm actually patron of an organisation that gives awards to schools who actually go for it and take risks. But I don't think there's actually much you can actually do to change things. What I applaud is that it's so bad. It's terrible. It's madness. It's the after dinner stories. It's terrible, and it's great because that means we must be just about to turn the corner. And that's how society changes and the world changes. Things get, you know, it's that the pendulum swims way over here, which is where we are right now. So something's going to change. And I just sit back and watch the thing happen because that is how the world works.
Thank you all very much indeed. That is it for this big debate. My thanks to the panel, the entrepreneur Simon Woodruff, Judith Hackett from the Health and Safety Executive, Mick Brooks from the National Association of Head Teachers, and John Gaunt from The Sun, as well, of course, as our audience here in the studio. Thank you very much for your contributions. The debate continues on our website, that's teachers.tv, so you can let us know your opinions on how schools deal with risk and safety. But from all the team here, goodbye.